This story happened to Jiro 3 years ago. At that time, he worked for a plastic manufacturing company near his house. However, Jiro's company changed its working location, moving to the suburbs, more than 20 kilometers from his home. That caused a lot of inconvenience in Jiro's travels. And Jiro came up with a good idea. He signed up as a driver and took passengers along the way. That helped Jiro have more income, enough to take care of gas. That day, although he got off work a bit late, he was still not worried because the customer had booked an appointment in advance, and both also gave a suitable time frame. As soon as he got to the car, Jiro's phone rang loudly. He opened his phone and saw that it was his customer's phone number. After answering a few questions, Jiro hurriedly got into the car and left the company at more than 10 o'clock at night. That day, Jiro had about 3 guests who needed a ride. And Jiro also ran a few laps to bring the other 2 guests to the place. The last guest met Jiro at a restaurant and went back the same way as he did. Arriving there, the guest who had been standing there before was a stout man. His face was red and looked like he had drunk a lot of alcohol. Seeing the car arrive, the man said goodbye to his friends and hurriedly got into the car. It seemed that the man had gone to a colleague's birthday party. After the man stepped into the car, the strong smell of alcohol covered the inside of the car, making Jiro frown uncomfortably. But because Jiro received the guest, Jiro had to endure it. He could only tell the man not to vomit in his car. The guest was too drunk. He also smiled and answered roughly to Jiro. The wheelchair rolled. Jiro just wanted to run fast to get home quickly. The road was almost uninhabited and also very dark. Suddenly Jiro heard strange sounds coming from the back seat. Before he could speak to ask, Jiro saw the man's miserable expression. He seemed to want to vomit. Worried, Jiro hastily shouted to stop him. If the man vomited in the car, Jiro had to spend a lot of money to clean his car. Seeing that the man couldn't hold it any longer, Jiro quickly pulled the car to the side of the road so that the fat man could get out of the car and vomit. Before Jiro got out of the car, the man threw open the door and rushed out. The man would probably vomit in the car if Jiro stopped a little late. The man climbed over the barrier, running into the grass inside. It seemed that despite being drunk, the man still wanted to keep the environment clean. Jiro found it funny, so he decided to come and help the man. Jiro also climbed over the fence, intending to help the man back to the car. But when Jiro was not far away, the scene in front of him scared him to the point of turning blue. Behind the fence was a collective cemetery. There were many graves here, and weeds had overgrown. It seemed that the cemetery had been abandoned for a long time, and the people buried here had no relatives. The surroundings were quite creepy, which gave Jiro a bit of a chill. Suddenly, the sound of vomiting resounded loudly in his ears, causing Jiro to wake up. The fat guy didn't look closely and was vomiting on the part of the deserted tomb. That tomb had some inscriptions on the headstone, but it was all blurred with time and nothing could be seen. After vomiting, the man's expression also improved, but Jiro was extremely worried. Without saying anything, Jiro approached and grabbed the man's shirt and dragged him away. Because of standing here unable to say anything, Jiro intended to get in the car and make it clear to the man. But the man seemed very stubborn. The man couldn't stand being dragged so unreasonably, so he shoved Jiro's hand away. Seeing the man like this, Jiro didn't dare to say much, only told the man to take a closer look at the place where he had just vomited. As soon as the man turned his face to look, the grave in front of him made him panic because insulting the deceased was not good. After that, the man hurriedly prostrated himself repeatedly, pleading with the invisible person to forgive him for not paying attention and vomiting into their graves. After a while of bowing, the fat man hurriedly turned away with a worried expression that scared Jiro too. Jiro glanced at the grave one last time and then hurried after the man. The atmosphere here was chilling. The two got into the car and were extremely silent. The road was quiet, without anyone, and it was more than half an hour before they would reach the city. The fog was suddenly thick, obstructing vision, so Jiro had to slow down to observe the road. But the strange thing was that the man sitting in the back was silent. He didn't make a sound. This thing worried Jiro, so he turned his eyes back to talk to the man. But bad things happened. The man suddenly trembled. Blood from his mouth drenched his chest. His eyes rolled back, looking very scary. Seeing that the situation was not good, Jiro quickly braked the car and ran to the back to check the situation. Jiro was afraid that the man was relapsing from a disease that Jiro didn't know about. Trying to scream, but the fat man couldn't answer. As soon as Jiro touched the man's flesh, Jiro felt extremely strange. The man's flesh was as flabby as if it was about to melt, and the sweat was also very sticky. Jiro looked closely. He saw that the man was covered with something very sticky. His body gave off a terrible stench. This thing made Jiro think of corpses because the man looked like a decomposing corpse. This man's face was purple, his eyes were rolling back, his veins were full of blood, and his mouth was still pouring out red blood, looking very scary. While thinking about it, the man suddenly jumped out of the car, pushing Jiro to the ground. Being defenseless, Jiro did not have time to resist and was immediately pushed to the ground, causing him pain. The man walked towards Jiro, his body suddenly becoming strangely twisted, like a zombie. Thinking the man would rush over and do something to Jiro, he covered his face with his hand. But the strange thing was that the man did not walk towards Jiro, but suddenly changed direction. The man turned and walked into the opposite direction, groaning incessantly. Everything was really scary and strange. In Jiro's mind, he thought if he should run away or not. But Jiro reminded himself that the man was a guest who booked this car. If something happened to the man and Jiro left, Jiro would inevitably be implicated. After thinking that, Jiro went to the car and took out some things. These were the anti-evil items that Jiro always carried with him when traveling long distances. Looking at the side of the road, he accidentally saw a peach tree. According to folklore, the devil was very afraid of peach wood. Thinking that Jiro immediately broke a small peach branch, hoping to help him. Jiro followed behind the other man, not knowing where he was going. Taking the opportunity that the man wasn't paying attention, he took out the exorcism trigram necklace he bought from his pocket. Jiro then rushed over and quickly put it around the fat man's neck, hoping to help him. Suddenly the man stopped, no longer walking. Jiro thought his method worked, but not. The man turned to look at Jiro, took off the rope around his neck, and became extremely angry. The man's forehead was full of veins, his eyes were red, he rushed towards Jiro. The man's fingernails also suddenly grew longer. Although he dodged in time, Jiro couldn't escape being injured. The man's fingernails were as sharp as those of a wild animal, easily tearing Jiro's flesh and making him bleed. The current situation was extremely dangerous because this road had no one passing by. Before Jiro could finish thinking, the fat man rushed to Jiro again like a crazy animal. At this point, Jiro was more mentally prepared, so he firmly grasped the peach tree in his hand. If the peach wood worked, then the man must have been possessed by a ghost. The man rushed over. Although he was now very strong in return, because of his weight he was very slow. Jiro easily dodged the attack. He circled behind the man and used peachwood to hit the man's back with a strong whip. Right where the mark of the whip was on the man's back, smoke appeared. Strange, Jiro thought to himself. Maybe fighting ghosts was like this. Jiro was too surprised to see these things for the first time, but he couldn't help but be overjoyed. Being hit by surprise made the fat man even angrier. He lunged like crazy at Jiro, but of course he was too slow. Jiro was able to dodge again. Then Jiro swung the tree, lashing the man in the face, causing the man's face to be instantly wounded and smoked like his back. At this point, although angry, the man seemed to have calmed down and was a bit afraid. Taking the opportunity, Jiro rushed to use the peach tree to strangle the fat man. Jiro tightened his grip on the man's neck. The smoke rose again like cooked meat. The man also cried out in pain. It seemed that this method had worked. The man's face gradually became rosy again. The body was warmer and the stench gradually disappeared. Seeing that, Jiro quickly let go of the wooden tree, afraid that a long squeeze would kill the man. After regaining consciousness, the man looked up at Jiro and stammered about his encounter with a ghost. The man said that not long after the car drove, suddenly a woman appeared in the car sitting next to him. The girl's mouth kept muttering to the man to come back to her house. The man was too scared to scream, intending to call Jiro. But before he could scream, the girl turned to look at him with red eyes, purple, cracked skin. Very scary. As soon as the man shouted, he couldn't remember anything after that. Just know that he had followed the girl a very long way, but he did not know where he was going. Then the man felt his head throbbing, like someone hit him, then opened his eyes and saw Jiro in front of him. Hearing the story, Jiro knew for sure that it was related to the deserted tomb. The two quickly ran to the car and drove as fast as they could back to the city. Sometime later, Jiro never took that road again. He chose a different route, a little further, but with more traffic. This story was the scariest thing in his life. In 2019, Ken and his colleague Kiba went on a business trip to the suburbs. Both returned home after finishing their jobs. Because of going away, and it appeared to be a bit boring, so the two found something to discuss with each other. So Kiba stated that it appeared to be the route where there were many rumors about ghosts. He looked outside, then turned to Ken. Do you believe the rumors about female ghosts appearing on the street? Ken turned to assure him that it was all a rumor. Besides, nothing had happened when they passed by there in the morning. When it came to ghosts topic, Ken was only now paying attention. It was true that the road was very dark and frightening at night. All of a sudden, Ken was startled and slowed down as he noticed a girl ahead of him walking slowly. The girl was dressed in a short skirt which resembled business attire. She had a slim body and walked slowly. Kiba and Ken had just seen the girl when their eyes lit up, and Ken offered to give her a ride. Both sounded the horn to get her attention, but strangely, she still didn't intend to dodge the car or turn around. As a result, Kiba purposefully banged on the car door in order to make a noise and attract her attention. Hey baby, are you hitchhiking? There is a spare spot in our car here. The fact that she didn't react made Kiba a bit impatient. He leaned forward to get a better look at her, but all of a sudden Kiba was terrified. His voice stammered and his expression was amazing. At the point, Kiba was almost speechless. His entire body stiffened, showing great horror when he saw the girl's face. It was a pale face. Black eye sockets and both eyes and mouth were bleeding non-stop, which was extremely frightening. Kiba was still trembling at the point, stammering that there was a ghost, even though Ken was surprised to ask what happened again and again. Kiba was still terrified and shouted loudly, urging Ken to hurry up. "It was a ghost! She was a ghost! Hurry up!" Ken returned to take a look after hearing Kiba's statement. He was also bewildered by Kiba's demeanor. Kiba now continued to shout, looking extremely scared. "Hurry up! She is chasing us!" In the end, Ken reflected and asked whether Kiba was trying to make fun of him or not. Under Ken's scrutiny, Kiba did not appear to change his expression, remaining the same white and terrified face. "Don't you believe it? It is a real ghost!" Before he could continue, the scene in front of Kiba caused his face to change color. Ken also became aware of something unexpected at the moment, and he was taken aback. Both of them were terrified now. What the hell was going on? It was still the same girl. She appeared in front of the car, and because it was so unexpected that Ken couldn't control the steering wheel, causing the car to wobble. Ken struggled to keep his grip on the steering wheel, and the car narrowly missed the girl. Because it was right at the turn, it caused the car to swerve to the side and then to the other side, creating a very dangerous situation. After regaining his composure, Kiba breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, nothing had happened. Ken was also sweating at the time. It turned out there was a real ghost. She just walked behind and briefly appeared in front of the car. It was terrifying. The car sped up to a rest stop. Ken immediately stopped the car. Ken quickly got out of the car and urged his friend to pee. Having to meet a ghost made him terrified in order that he almost peed his pants. Ken told Kiba to deal with it quickly and got back into the car. Ken and Kiba stood a few trees apart. The space was quiet and cold. The surrounding forest was also extremely gloomy. Probably because there were no streetlights, and the streets here were so dense that they blocked out the moonlight, making the place even darker and more terrifying. Kiba was comfortably peeing when he abruptly heard a noise from inside the forest. It was a long, frightening howl. It was terrifying. It was the same girl from before. From afar, she had a crooked gait. Her head tilted to one side as if her neck was broken. Eyes and mouth still pouring with blood. She was getting closer to him. As soon as Kiba saw her, he froze. His legs were stiff and he couldn't move. The girl staggered like a zombie. Kiba stood in fear for a few seconds. Then he held and dashed towards the car. Ken was leaning against the car, smoking a cigarette, when he noticed his friend running out with a terrifying face. He ran while screaming, "There was a ghost!" Ken rushed in and started the car after realizing that something terrifying had occurred. Ken then quickly stepped on the pedal and drove away. At the moment, Ken and Kiba were convinced that the ghost girl was following them. Now even Ken was shaking with fear. They were both drenched in sweat, but their bodies were cold and shivering. The two were moving at breakneck speed, but the sight in front of them was incredible. Ken's eyes widened in surprise as well. It was her. She stood in front of the car, and by the time they noticed her and realized what had happened, it was too late. There was a horrible noise. Ken crashed straight into her. The force of the impact was so powerful that she was thrown very high in front of them. Blood was dripping like a broken water pipe, splashing everywhere from the air then sticking to their windshield. And in an instant, a long loose head of hair fell in front of the windshield. Her head was dangling from the window, staring them down. Her eyes became bloodshot and almost protruding. The mouth was wide open and it looked terrible. At the point, Ken almost lost control. His hands could no longer direct the steering wheel in front of him. The car collided with a power pole on the side of the road. The power pole shook violently, but fortunately it did not collapse on the car. The accident was terrifying. The first half of the car was destroyed, and the window was shattered. Kiba then scrambled to get out of the car. He was heavily leaning on the ground as a fulcrum. But at the moment when he raised his eyes, a horrible scene occurred that haunted Kiba for the rest of his life. The female demon flew towards him from afar at breakneck speed. She opened a big mouth with a red tongue protruding in front of him. After the accident, Ken unfortunately died in the car. Kiba, on the other hand, was able to save his life because he was treated on time. However, Kiba now had gone insane, and he was still haunted by the ghost girl. In December 1989, the event occurred in Hong Kong's North District, which was an international municipality in the New Territories. There was an old restaurant called Kong Cha that specialized in various types of appealing cuisine, but generally only offered char siu, rice, and pho. Another day, Sheng, a young guy working at the restaurant, received a call to order food for 4 people, including pho and grilled pork rice with eggs. "It's at number C, building B in the Garden Plaza, isn't it? Okay, I'll deliver it to you right now." Sheng instantly grabbed a pen and notepad to jot down the address. He then proceeded to deliver food to clients. This address wasn't difficult to find, so Sheng didn't have to spend too much time to look for it. It was an ancient building. It was chilly and appeared like it hadn't been occupied in a long time. When he arrived at the correct address, he raised his hand and rang the doorbell. A blast of wind blew, sending shivers down his spine. But the doorbell rang for a long time. No one opened the door, and the posters strewn in front of the door indicated that this home had appeared to be abandoned for a long time. Sheng rang the doorbell many times more, but no one replied or opened the door. Sheng wondered if he had misspelled the address since the restaurant had been quite busy before. Thinking he'd been scammed, he turned his back to return to the restaurant, but as he did, a voice in the room sounded from behind Sheng. It sounded like someone was attempting to open the door. He thought he heard a voice, but it was foggy and indistinct. The door suddenly opened with a creak, accompanied by a terrible sound made Sheng nervous. The door was opened to expose a small gap, but the interior was so dark that Sheng couldn't see what was inside. The person inside only spoke in a low, raspy voice and very slightly opened the door, as though no one was permitted to peek inside. Then that person handed a banknote through the gap of the door. This person's hand was really odd. Even though the person opened the door slightly and placed the money outside, Sheng couldn't see who it was. It appeared to be a male. Sheng carefully examined the note. There was no issue. Sheng thought the man was strange when he instructed him to leave the meal at the door. That night, the restaurant was being cleaned up and getting ready to close. While auditing the income and expenses for the day, the owner noticed something odd. He discovered a joss paper among real money. He had no idea where this note originated from, but it made him feel extremely uneasy. Who is taking part in this game? Why is there a joss paper here? Mr. Lee displayed the note to the employees and cautioned them. He suspected that real money had been switched for joss paper. He tried to mention it aloud so that the staff wouldn't do it again, but he became enraged and tossed the joss paper in the garbage. The next day, an order for dinner came from that address again, and they ordered the restaurant to serve them the same meal as yesterday. The owner promptly confirmed the order and asked Sheng to continue delivering. However, the situation with food delivery remained same from yesterday. Money was still given through the door gap, and food was still requested to be put at the door. The people inside were still not revealing themselves.
"Who did it? Do you think I'm a moron?"
The owner's voice continued to yell loudly. The reason was that he spotted a joss paper again at night. Seeing the boss was so upset, Sheng then informed him about the unusual food delivery to that address. For a long time, the owner reasoned that if the residents in that house continued to order meals from the restaurant, he would find out the truth. The next day, as predicted, there was an order from that address again. The owner personally delivered the meal to the location and received the cash from the door gap. He picked up the bill and carefully examined it, flipping it back and forth, but he couldn't see anything suspicious about it. The owner, like Sheng, placed food at the door. He hastily grabbed the money and departed, his face now full of contemplation mixed with bewilderment. Returning to the store, he placed the money aside this time to observe if anything odd happened, in order to prevent the same misunderstanding as the previous 2 times. After the owner had completed calculating other income, he glanced at the bills in the evening, but what he saw shocked him. This occurrence terrified him so much that he dropped his cigarette and his mouth wide open as if he had witnessed something awful. Those seemingly regular money notes he had placed in a different corner of the table had now been transformed into joss papers once more. The owner was so terrified that he yelled to the police in a quivering voice.
"Police! It's me! Something awful has occurred. Please be here as soon as possible."
Following to what the owner said, the police hurried to the location, but they discovered that the doorbell was entirely broken and no one came to open the door. The cops had to use force to smash the door down. However, once inside, they discovered that the door was locked from the inside, but the horrifying image in front of their eyes caused them all to fear. There was a mahjong table in the middle of the room and some dead people next to it. They died in a big puddle of dried blood. These people had been dead for a long time, and their corpses had shrunk, leaving just dry skeletons, and their flesh had disintegrated. Based on the conditions at the site, they were most likely using a coal burner in the room to keep warm, but ended up inhaling poisonous gas. Because these people lived very private lives and didn't interact with anyone, no one discovered their bodies. But the empty lunch boxes littered throughout the room gave the cops pause, because everyone in the room was dead. So, who ate the food? These corpses were discovered and transported to the mortuary for forensic testing, confirming that they had been dead for more than a week, although the food in their stomachs had only been there for 2 days, which was rice and fur. The test findings astounded the whole Hong Kong police force. The dead man's fingerprints were also discovered on Mr. Lee's joss papers. Soon after, this odd event traveled across Hong Kong and was published by various media outlets. The occurrence became a riddle that the police could not solve. It had become the Hong Kong's police's sole publicly acknowledged super mysterious case in decades. According to the Feng Shui shaman, the spirits of the dead could not leave the building where the incident occurred since there was no sunshine. so they constantly felt they were still alive, and sometimes people still could hear them. That room was filled with the sound of mahjong players. Hello there. I'm currently a college student who also used to work as a part-time shipper. Actually, it was my side job working as a shipper. It was pretty tiring and I was weary sometimes, but I earned a pretty good amount of money from it. Whether it was a sunny day or a rainy one, there were always lots of food orders from the customers. Occasionally, I had to learn how to deal with my difficult customers, or how to greet them appropriately so they could be satisfied and give me a 5-star review. I was pleased with the shipping job and I had no intention of looking for another one until one day. Normally the working time for a shipper isn't fixed. There were days when I finished my work at 11 PM, but there were also days that I had to work until 2 AM or even 3 AM. At night, when there were fewer food orders, the shippers would gather at one particular place, smoking, chatting while waiting for the orders. Normally the topic of the talks would revolve around the freaky customers they encountered, or how some restaurant staff had bad attitude towards them. One wouldn't be able to do this job if they didn't have enough stamina and patience. Also, I was chit-chatting with my co-workers when my phone suddenly vibrated. It was a food order from a customer, but the address in it looked kinda strange to me. I asked my two co-workers where the place was, but they had no idea. The location was unclear, and it was already at midnight, but since I accidentally accepted the order, I had to say goodbye to my friends and hit the road. But at least I still had Google Maps with me. I didn't feel worried at all, as I thought I would easily find the place and quickly return home. Then I drove to the restaurant, bought the food and delivered it to the customer. However, as I was on my way to the address which was displayed on the phone screen, I felt like the distance was way longer than I had expected. The further I drove, the more unlikely I found it that I could find the place. In a moment I realized that I had been outside the city. Feeling annoyed, I wanted to go back, but thinking of the long distance I had driven and the food I had bought, I patiently tried to reach the destination. Behind a row of dense trees appeared a riverbank road and then a forest. But the thing that was worth noticing was I didn't encounter any single person on my way to the place. Right the moment I wanted to quit, a notification popped up saying I was only 100 meters away from the destination. So I kept driving. I stopped by a large gate. It looked like there was a mansion behind the gate. But there was something really strange with this house. From the front door to the garden, there were no lights in sight. The gate wasn't locked, and there was also no doorbell. I made a phone call, but no one answered it. So I plucked up all my courage and went inside with a food bag in my hand. I had to turn on a flashlight to navigate my way to the house. How enormous this mansion was. The garden was extremely large that took me forever to find the way to the main door. There were even gusts of cold winds that sent chills down my spine, giving me shivers as sweat was dripping down my forehead. Not only that, in the dim light of the flash, I discovered something truly frightening. At the end of the garden appeared a cemetery as it slowly emerged from the darkness. The eerie sound of leaves flying in the air made my skin crawl. I started trembling when I saw the graves. The food bag dropped out of my hand and fell onto the ground. I was dumbfounded for a few seconds and quickly ran out of the place as fast as I could. I got on my bike and drove away in horror. The next day I got sick and was bedridden for 2 days. It was truly the worst time of my life. As I woke up, there were two options that I had to pick one out. One was to continue my shipping job and the other one was to quit and find myself a new job. So after 3 days I decided to get back to work, even though I was still not recovered from the incident that had happened to me that night. I told my 2 co-workers about the bizarre incident. One of them assumed there was a likelihood that one making the order was living at the cemetery, while the other said I had gotten myself involved in some ghostly stuff. They advised me to buy some offerings and burn them to get rid of the bad luck. Although I didn't hold out much hope that this would work, I still did it anyway as it was for my safety. But things didn't get any better. A few days later, another spooky incident happened to me again. That night, I received a food order and the address was at an apartment building where I had once been to. I easily found the building. It was located in the city and took me 7 minutes to reach the destination. However, the building looked pretty old and there were only a few residents who's been living there. The place to which the food had to be delivered was an apartment located on the 7th floor. The building didn't even have elevators as I had to climb up the stairs, but it was still better than navigating the path on the garden of the cemetery that night. I finally found the apartment. As things were going okay, I somehow had a bad premonition. I knocked on the door with my heart beating uncontrollably. Fortunately, a woman opened the door. As soon as she saw me, she confusedly asked who I was and why I came to her place. Fearing that I had come to the wrong address, I took out my phone and checked if it was any mistake, but found none. I had indeed come to the right place. But the woman insisted on not ordering any food. Even her husband constantly affirmed that I had come to the wrong address. I was angry but chose not to say anything as it would violate the company's principles if I irritated the customers. I suddenly remembered there was always a phone number in an order, so I pressed call. The phone in their house rang out as soon as I called. But soon there was a bewildered expression on them as they said they didn't know where the sound was originating from and even had no idea who had placed the order since there was only 2 of them in the house. A few seconds later, as if the 2 had remembered something, their faces changed color, and for me, there was like a burning fire in my heart as I was under the impression the 2 were playing a joke on me. According to the man, the ringtone was similar to that of his father's phone. Moreover, it even came out of his room. I was delighted to hear that. I quickly handed the food back to him as we finally knew who was the one who made the order. "Could you 2 please take the food to your father and make a payment for me?" But the scared and panicked look on them gave me an impression that things were not as simple as they might seem. As I just finished my sentence, the 2 turned around and spoke simultaneously. Their father had passed away. I couldn't stay calm, as I thought they were teasing me. With a furious expression on my face, I howled at them and demanded them to take the food back. Seeing me behaving aggressively, the man was agitated. The woman had to rush in and stop us from getting into a fight. Eventually she agreed to pay for the food. After making the payment, the 2 slammed the door in anger. It was unknown why, but I didn't want to leave immediately, as I just stood in front of the door for a while in bewilderment. Then I accidentally heard part of a conversation from the 2 freaky customers. Their father had passed away a month ago. His phone had run out of battery and was carefully placed into a drawer in his room, so it would be impossible for someone to use his phone and place an order. After listening to their conversation, I quickly ran away in horror. Right the moment I got out of the building, my phone vibrated. Can you believe it? It was the number I previously called that gave me a 5-star review. Later, I gradually got used to dealing with these bizarre incidents and also the freaky customers. But for my safety, I had avoided delivering food at night. This story happened to me when I was studying in an intermediate vocational school. That year my school had a rule that it was forbidden to go out at night. I was a naughty student, so I snuck out to play games at night by climbing the wall. My purpose was to go to an internet shop to play games. These internet shops were a dozen minutes a walk away from my school, but I could do exercise every night by walking to that shop. The internet shop was usually very crowded at night. My friends and I often ran there to play. Although I loved to game, I didn't play all night. I would only play for about 2 to 3 hours. That time, as usual, I would play until nearly midnight. After playing for a few hours, I would usually find a noodle shop to eat late and then went back to school. Before going there, I would quickly pay for the game and leave. In a position a few seats away from me, a boy was playing a game while dozing off in a chair. The sleepy boy had a bad temper. No one dared to tease or destroy him at times like this. He dozed off, arms stretched behind his back. When I was passing by, I accidentally touched his arm. I immediately apologized, and luckily he didn't wake up. This internet shop was located in a commercial area. The front gate was completely closed, so if I wanted to leave, I had to go through the exit behind. I was walking down the stairs very quietly at the time. Suddenly I saw a man standing right next to the wall opposite the stairs going down. What scared me was that this man had no legs, and his body seemed to be floating in the air. I was frightened but also had to leave. When I got too close, he was gone. I quickly assured myself, thinking that I might be a bit dizzy from gaming, so I looked at it wrong. I quickly exited the basement. When I was about to step out of the basement, I came across something strange. A woman was lying on the roof of the hatch with long jet black hair hanging down. She was staring at me, but the woman had no eyes, even though I knew she was looking right at me. If I hadn't leaned against the wall, I would have fallen to the ground long ago. My legs could no longer stand. Fortunately, the woman also disappeared. My first thought was that this basement was haunted. I immediately decided to run out of there. I was just running out the door when a strong light hit me in my face, so bright that I couldn't see anything. Right after the sound of brakes almost burning the car wheel, I realized I was standing in the middle of the road. If the driver hadn't braked in time, I would have died from being hit by a car. Luckily, I was fine and only received a few scoldings. I almost lost my life, standing on the side of the road for a long time because I was so shocked by what I had just witnessed and faced. My only thought at the time was to hurry back to school, not being able to stay outside anymore. I wandered about walking on the sidewalk, thinking about what I had seen in my mind. I was scared and worried. As I was walking like that, I suddenly heard a weak woman singing from behind. It sounded so far away, yet so close. My back seemed to stiffen. I only dared to look to the side to feel. Unexpectedly, behind me, a woman in a white dress was slowly approaching me. I didn't hear any footsteps, only singing. The song was not loud, but the humming was quiet. But when I heard it, I would shiver. I absolutely did not dare to run for fear of her finding out. I could only increase my walking speed, so I strode very long and fast. Although I was quickening my pace, she was able to keep up, even though the distance between us was narrowing. The silence that reached my ears made my heart sink. I was so scared that I couldn't help but cry. I felt like life was too short at the time. My legs also stopped working and I couldn't seem to run away. At the time, I just thought that I didn't study well and would not find a decent job in the future, so I wondered why didn't I just die. At that time, I only thought about death. The thought was so powerful that I fell into silence. Suddenly, a car horn sounded, startling me, and I immediately woke up. The taxi parked on the curb. The driver got out of the car and suddenly asked me loudly why I wanted to die. It was only at that moment that I realized I was standing in the middle of the street again, but just a few minutes ago I thought I was walking on the sidewalk. The driver looked at me and thought I was about to commit suicide, so he approached me.
I was scared and started crying out loud. He no longer cursed at me but gently asked me what was wrong and why I was seeking death. He comforted me and then took me back to the school without taking charge. The fact that I was punished for running away from school was inevitable, and after that night I fell ill. I had a constant fever and had to take medicine for the rest of the several days at school. At noon the other day, a classmate came to the dormitory to visit me and tell me about what had happened in the internet shop we frequented. He said the internet shop I went to the night before had a person who suddenly passed away. He told me the news. I was extremely shocked because the dead person was the one I accidentally bumped into when I was leaving. To this day, I still think that the fact I saw ghosts again and again may be because I accidentally touched that person. Because of him, I could see ghosts. My uncle has worked as a taxi driver for more than 5 years. This is also the first time that he had encountered something scary as well as strange. He would usually work until after 11 o'clock, and at that time around 9 p.m. he would still be doing his job. But on the road he passed, there would be a few customers waiting for him. He would quickly pick up a male guest and invite them to the car. At this time, my uncle would also be taking customers to a place called MP Tower located in the inner city. When he entered the city center, the road would be very crowded. He would also quickly drop off the customers in front of the big building. He would then drive to another crowded place nearby. On the side of the road, there were 3 people standing with their hands out to catch a cab. After getting into the car, they told my uncle that they wanted to go to a suburb. The place was more than 110 kilometers from where they were standing, and it would have taken a lot of time to get there and back. My uncle gave them the cost. The 3 of them immediately agreed without making any negotiation. My uncle transported them out of the city and quickly onto the highway. Getting off the highway, he would drive into a deserted country road following the instructions of the 3 young men. The further he drove, the darker the road became. It would be surrounded by luxuriant trees. In my uncle's mind, he felt a bit scared, wondering if these 3 people wanted to trick him into going to a deserted place and commit murder or robbery. It wasn't until the car entered the village that they asked him to stop the car. After paying him, they got out. My uncle immediately drove back to the city. After driving quite a distance, in his mind, he also wanted to catch some more customers on the way to the city because it was convenient and he would have more income then, right? Even though he thought it was wishful thinking, at that moment at the side of the road, a woman was waiting and reaching out to catch the car. The woman was pregnant. He didn't know if it was because she was about to give birth or what was happening, but her expression was extremely contorted. He stopped the car and asked her where she wanted to go. The door opened and the woman awkwardly got into the car but didn't say a word. She only groaned because of the pain in her stomach. When my uncle saw this, he ran to help her get into the car. As this was something that he's never experienced before, he was a little bit confused. He asked the lady if she wanted to go home or go to a hospital. She still did not answer a word. Seeing that the situation might be stressful, he decided to take the woman to the hospital because she was already showing signs of labor. Without hesitation, he drove very quickly because of the hospital location far away. He was afraid that he would not be on time. Sometimes he would look in the rearview mirror to observe the woman's every move. In the back seat, the woman was holding her stomach while groaning. The stomach seemed to be moving as well. Suddenly, something started protruding very sharply out of her belly. It was not like the movement of a fetus, but more like that of a demon wanting to come out. After that, her stomach moved more and more violently. The fetus repeatedly kicked the belly. The woman cried for help in extreme pain. But when my uncle stared at the woman because he was worried about her, he had already let go of the steering wheel. When he turned his head to look back, he felt a large beam of light hitting his face. At this moment, in front of him was a car from the opposite direction that was rushing towards him at fast speed. Fortunately, he was able to turn the steering wheel in time so he could avoid the car accident. When he stabilized again, he immediately stopped the car and went to find the owner of the other car to talk to. Although the driver on the other side apologized, my uncle was still angry. He told the other driver that he was carrying a pregnant woman. If there was an accident, who would be the responsible one? But after looking at the car, the man on the other side said he had never seen the pregnant woman my uncle talked about. There was no one in the car. My uncle wanted to prove his point, so he led the man back to the car to take a closer look. My uncle pointed at the woman sitting in the back of the car and told the man to look there. What my uncle didn't expect was that the woman had just disappeared. Only a large pile of mucus was left on the car seat. The man thought that my uncle had made a mistake and there was nothing serious, so he left. My uncle couldn't figure out what had happened. He checked the mucus in the back seat. It was not like amniotic fluid during childbirth. It was the kind of mucus that he didn't even know what it would be or what it was, only that it smelled very stinky and foul. He thought to himself that the person he had helped might be a ghost, so he was very scared and did not dare to stay there any longer. When he returned to the city center, he immediately took the car for a wash. Even though it was washed many times, the stench still could not go away. My uncle thought that this car was cursed with bad luck, so he decided to sell it and buy a new one. Finally, there was one thing that he would never forget. The person who bought his car got into a car accident only a week after he sold it. He didn't know if it had anything to do with the ghost he met, but that's what made him never dare to cross that road at night ever again.